Great, thanks. Welcome everyone to Summit Education Friday, April 5th. Just a couple of minutes before 1 o'clock. And we are starting to going back to H630 and relating towards cooperative education services. And we have superintendents with us today. And as I mentioned, we're hoping everybody can keep 5 or 10 minutes. We have a hard stop at 2 on this topic. So Mr. Licklider, thanks a million for joining us, and we learn your testimony.
Thank you. And I listened to Jeff Francis' testimony on behalf of the Vermont Superintendent Association. And my name is Mike Licklider. I'm the superintendent of the Harwood Unified Union School District, which stretches 6 towns from Waterbury to Warren. And this is my second year as superintendent of Harwood, my second year in Vermont. Prior to this, I spent a career in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is about 90 miles west of Philadelphia. I was in a school district for 13 years as superintendent of about 5,400 students, and we were serviced by a regional service agency called an intermediate unit in Pennsylvania. And that's why I believe I was asked to speak a little more about my experiences. And I will mention before we were on the record, I mentioned my wife's in the audience, Mary Edith. She actually worked for an intermediate unit in our area.
Great.
So it was an intermediate unit that covered 2 counties, our county, Lancaster County, as well as the county.
That was your term for the BOCES.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. Between the 2 counties, we had a population of about 700,000 people, so a large area, and there was an economy of scale involved. They were originally started in the 1970s as federal special education requirements came into law to provide those services that schools didn't have at the time. But over the period of 40 years, they've grown in services. Our intermediate unit provided services from special education. That's where they started, through programs, early childhood services, special education services, including autism, visually impaired, emotional support, job training programs for students as they transition out of school, multiple disabilities. My wife worked in the community education division, providing high school equivalency, English as a second language, reentry programs for people coming out of the prison, and a host of other services that help build capacity. For example, there was a unit that worked with our finance directors in each of our districts to conduct joint purchasing. There were some programs for some of our smaller schools. I had a larger district in that area, but there were some schools with less than 1,000 students as well. So providing human resources and programs such as that. When Jeff talked the other day, he talked about one of the purposes was to organically grow scale and efficiency in Vermont, and I do see that there's possibilities here. I did a lot of research before we decided to relocate to Vermont, and we're very glad we did. But one of the challenges that I have that is unique, I think, to being in a more rural area, really are those services, those specialized services for students, but also some of those specialized services for school districts. We have a larger school district in Harwood with about 1,700 students, but talking to some of my colleagues in smaller areas, I do believe there's possibility. So this is something that I believe was championed in the legislature, provide additional resources, potentially reduce costs in some areas, but also to increase capacity. And I think it has a lot of potential, and I'd be happy to answer questions just with that little bit of background.
That's great testimony. Thank you very much. One of the things we've been talking about related to all this, of course, is the purchasing power to save money. And so some of that you've experienced. Can you also say something about maybe teachers, or, one of the things Mr. Francis and others have talked about, could this new structure, this new governance model allow these new districts to have one full-time French teacher? Makes it more attractive to that French teacher to have a full-time job rather than the 0.2 here at this school and having to then maybe do other things. Can you see this as being helpful in that way?
I could see that for regular education, but especially for special education areas.
Okay.
We don't in Harwood have an autism specialist. We have some need for programs for blind and visually impaired that we're actually working with an organization in the Midwest at this point. I think there are a lot of examples in those areas that could benefit schools in the region to be able to pool resources because they're examples of programs that we don't have a need for a full-time individual, but we are legally mandated to provide those services. So I think being able to pool resources and have a mechanism by which schools can partner together, work together, and provide teachers in those areas. But there is possibilities for other areas. Example, the foreign language that you gave,
Yeah.
but I also think some of the mental health areas that we've been talking about a lot as well, that there's an ability to pool resources for those services that are also needed by schools.
And then my only other question is, can you see any conflict anywhere? In other words, with school boards, this is again a kind of a new governance structure. In Pennsylvania, was anything built in to prevent or avoid conflict? Did you see any conflict?
It worked a little differently. I think the enabling legislation and the way it's written is really good to start the process. Our experience is we had within those two counties, 22 school districts. So there was a governing board, and I know there is legislation that would have either a school board member as part of a board or a superintendent, I believe. But we did have a governing board, and then we had a group called the Superintendent Advisory Council that met with the executive director once a month to provide professional input into decisions that had to be made on behalf of that organization. So I think there can always be conflicts, particularly when you have a larger district that may be able to run their own programming without pooling resources. But since it is voluntary in that way, I believe it has good possibilities for Vermont. And really, it's a fee for service structure. So the way I experienced it is that there was no membership cost, but if we did purchase services, for example, like I gave the example of an autism teacher, if we were using that teacher once a week, we shared costs. But one of the big benefits that I see, and I've heard some testimony about this in the House Education Committee, is I don't believe we're able to fully utilize or fully take advantage of some of the federal grants that we could. And that's another way that I see that we could capture money. I gave the example of my wife working for the Community Education Division. She worked in reentry, and they had a federal grant of over $1 million targeted for services. And there are areas that I think that would assist Vermont in trying to capture some of those funds that are going to other states at this point in time.
Committee, any other questions? Go, Senator Hill, please.
Go ahead, because I'm still finding my stuff.
So, well, welcome. So we have a common background in Lancaster, grandparents, Lichtenwalders and Pakistos from Lancaster. So anyway, welcome. The question is, given your experience with BOCES, there's a criticism that's been aired that BOCES potentially introduce another layer of bureaucracy. And I'm wondering from your personal experience, what you might have experienced in that.
It could add a layer of bureaucracy if it's not managed well. The reason I think it is a good idea for Vermont is it would provide a layer of service that just does not exist at this moment in time. And I think there are some areas that could be a cost savings. I also think there are some areas that would not necessarily be a cost savings, that could be a cost shift. And I think you would have to be careful that how that's managed so that it does not add additional costs that are already covered within the system. So you would have to be, the BOCES in a Vermont situation have to carefully analyze what they're hiring and what kinds of positions, programs that are being offered.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't find the notes that I'd taken the other day, so I'm sorry about that. But I guess my question is, I did find it right at the very end. Was your model of the BOCES, was it actually a governing structure or was it a service agency entity? Because I had written down the other day that a service agency entity is not the same as a governing structure.
It was a service agency. It's considered a service agency. It was an agency of the Department of Education, State Department of Education. And they did, though, have a governing body as part of that structure.
And then, so I don't know if you sort of like listed all the things that you used yours for. I know you said mental health services, teaching, collaboration.
Special education
Special
services.
education.
Our agency, our intermediate unit did a lot of training. So in many cases, if there was a new state initiative coming out of our agency of education, they would often assign with dollars going to it, trainings programs. So for example, we implemented a statewide teacher evaluation system. And our intermediate unit was in charge then of implementation of that component so that it was delegated out from the agency.
That's fantastic. And professional development?
Yes, that was
Great.
also a piece. School improvement.
Great.
Yeah, I just want to say welcome, to Vermont. You've only been here 2 years, but I really do appreciate the perspective from Pennsylvania to Vermont. And if there are things that bubble up that you see that in your past history that Pennsylvania did something particularly well that you think would fit well in with Vermont, I hope you will let us know. Thank you. Good to see you.
Or the Discord walk?
Or didn't work well. Yeah. Mr. Clark.
Can we skip? Can we have Brooke go?
Brooke,
Okay.
of course, and you're here with us.
Ah.
Thank you.
And
And Mr. Clark, you're not interested or you're?
No, I'm very interested, but I think the flow will go better
Right.
this way.
We have, like we're saying, about 5 to 10 minutes for each witness.
I would be less than 5 minutes.
All right,
Great to see you in person.
good afternoon. Thank you for having me. For the record, I'm Brooke Wilson Farrell, 25-year education veteran, and I'm the superintendent of schools in Slate Valley, where I've been superintendent for the past 7 years. I also spent 12 years working in New York State, and I live in New York State currently. So, and as part of my work in New York State, I did work for both the local BOCES system part-time doing professional development in the area of virtual learning. I do feel that with the increased cost, declining enrollment, lack of staffing, and adequately licensed teachers, that the BOCES system could yield some real benefits in the state of Vermont if implemented well. I have personal experience in the BOCES system with it providing technical education, professional development, special education, really acting as an intermediary between the Department of Education in New York and the local schools. So when new training or new initiatives come out, it's usually the BOCES systems that go into the schools and help provide those trainings to the school districts. So it's a really collaborative relationship. Now, New York is much larger. They have 37 BOCES and they've been doing this since 1948. So they have a long track record. So,
But Ms. Wilson Farrell, may I ask, BOCES in New York, we've been talking about the name a lot.
Yeah.
So what is it that, is it the same thing in New York, BOCES, or?
so it stands for Board of
It
Cooperative
is, okay.
Education Services. However, each BOCES has a district superintendent.
Okay,
That district superintendent is paid part by the member districts and part by the state of New York.
Okay.
So their salary, they're funded jointly.
Okay.
And it's around a county model. So the one that I was part of was the Warren, Washington, Saratoga, Hamilton, and Essex County
wow,
BOCES. So really
huge,
extremely large. Some of these BOCES systems are larger than the entire state of Vermont.
Wow.
So that's important to have that context. So, I mean, the BOCES system where I currently live, I live in Granville, New York. They are in charge of substitute services, all of those kinds of things for schools. So it's not purchasing curriculum. Schools don't have individual curriculum directors or instructional coaches. Those are provided through the BOCES system. So there's really a lot that they get through the BOCES system, and you don't have to necessarily buy into every service. It's kind of a purchase service
yeah.
agreement model. So
The more I learn about it, the more enthusiastic I become. One thing I'm wondering is the counties that you mentioned in New York, that's a big
Yeah.
area. Could you see Vermont having one? Or do we benefit more from the sort of 7 or?
I think when we're initially starting, 6 or 7, a small, to really do it well and
Yeah.
implement it well, where
Okay.
you already have well-established relationships between school districts. Just because of the geography.
Yeah. And then, yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, quick comment, thank you for testifying, but just a quick comment to the one BOCES model. I think my concern is kind of going back to the bureaucracy element, and what I worry about or wonder about is so many different regions entering this same, one single pod, and people trying to figure out who has what and where to go to get what. And I feel like just having that one BOCES would actually create that bureaucracy, which is more to sit through.
Well, I also think the needs are different regionally around the
Yeah.
state. Our southwestern Vermont needs are very different than Chittenden County, so.
Center Weeks and Center.
No,
Center
sorry.
So the New York BOCES, do they do all the hiring for like the special educators?
No, not necessarily. They are in charge of superintendent
Okay.
searches though, generally
Yep.
for local districts. They're in charge of like food service contracts, could be transportation, depending on the district. Some districts choose to do that on their own. Distance learning, virtual learning, they might set up partnerships with colleges. For example, in my district where I live, they have a new Visions program where they kids can apply and go to the local college, and it's a partnership with Global Foundries around engineering. And so it's an expansion of the career and technical centers too, because the career and tech ed are part of the BOCES systems so they're not independent.
How about IT systems?
Yes, so they provide the IT services, group purchasing, bulk purchasing. Yeah.
Thanks, sir. So it's good to see you, Brooke. So, from your experience with the BOCES being a kind of on-demand system, how do they deal with staffing? Like, how do they figure out, if you're on demand and you're distributing professional development or substitute teacher services and such? How do they maintain?
That I'm not as familiar, I haven't worked in New York in 13 years, but my understanding is, I think there's a base amount that you have to pay to be part of a BOCES system, and then some things are added services. So everyone's automatically part of it, for the career and technical education piece and some of those other pieces. And then I think there's other services you can purchase. And they have a board of directors, board of education, that's made up of board members from the local districts, sit on that board and work with the district superintendent.
Thank you so much. I was really excited that you mentioned instructional coaches. Because when I first started hearing about the BOCES, I was like, oh my gosh, that would be a great way to organize instructional coaches. And I know in my district, it's always hard when we're working on the budget. There's a real push to really focus exclusively on classroom instruction, which I know is hugely important, but yet there are all these other folks who are also important in running a school district, and I think instructional coaches are one of them. And so I'm really happy you mentioned that.
Yeah, so the Department of Education, all their school improvement efforts run through the BOCES, and then they fan out to the schools and help support the teachers with that professional learning. And state testing as well is run through the BOCES system.
Yeah, I agree with our chair. I'm getting more excited the more I learn about it, for sure.
From the New York experience, in relation to BOCES kind of an education hierarchy, did the BOCES report into the equivalent Department of Education? Or
Yes, the
Okay,
Department of Ed, yeah.
thank you.
Ms. Olson Farrell, you're always welcome over the border. We
My
consider you like
son
a
is-
halftime
yeah,
honor. We need
I'm really More like a Vermonter than
Yeah.
a New Yorker,
We'll
but,
we'll accept you as a Vermonter.
my son's a senior next year, so
Oh.
after that,
Who knows?
you know, who knows, right?
Thank you very much. Really
Of course.
appreciate your contributions as always. Mr. Clark.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Coming down.
Be here. So Michael Clark, I am the last superintendent for the Essex Caledonia Supervisory Union. I am currently the superintendent of the Grand Isle Supervisory Union, and I'm the future superintendent for the Orange Southwest School District. So it's a perspective, but I think the perspective that I'm coming today is I've never worked for a BOCES. I've never been in a state that had a BOCES. I've worked in Vermont for 25 years. And I worked in small systems in Vermont. And as you can imagine, the kind of expertise that you just heard Brooke and Mike talking about, it's hard to come by when we were out in Essex Caledonia. If I wanted a really good instructional coach, how many people were there out there that were really good instructional coaches? Or, we could have probably figured out how to purchase in a better way. So I'm here sort of advocating for the BOCES bill from a standpoint of what it brings our current systems. It brings the expertise. I'm a pretty big believer, right, that work out in the Northeast Kingdom of consolidating supervisory union out of existence is one of my beliefs is that we don't have enough of the leaders, the teachers, we've really got to get to a spot where we start bringing some consolidation together. And the BOCES might be a way to start that process, and it might allow, when you're talking about the bureaucracy, what I found in my travels is that school systems really aren't that much different from each other. We like to think we are, but we operate pretty similarly, and our communities want a lot of the same things. When you start talking about vision, then you find that a lot of our communities have visions that overlap an awful lot. So does the BOCES present an opportunity for communities that currently see themselves different from each other? They play each other in sports, they compete, they whatever, see them working together and opening up opportunities and having that collaboration that you spoke of during Jeff's testimony. That was a really important piece. So to me, I think you're looking at a way of reducing some costs and really providing better services. And I think that when you start doing that, that's really what's going to bring equity to students, is if we start sharing services, if we start working together, if we start consolidating down from 56 different governing units in the state of Vermont, that's probably how we're going to find a better way towards equity. So that, I think, was what I had to say about BOCES.
Any questions?
It's easy, thanks.
Mr. Leiter, do you mind joining us again? I just have I think this might be a question that could be answered by you, having had the experience in Ms. Olson-Farrell also. The financial components of these, how did they work in Pennsylvania? And I'm even thinking New York, it's bank account kind of thing. This group made partnership with a local bank. Tell us a little bit about the sort of the financial organization, if you will, or if you think there's anything we should sort of keep our eye on.
Well, they had their own organization, so it was in many senses, the school district, they didn't have a superintendent, they had an executive director, a finance director. Again, because of the scale, because you're dealing with a population of 2 counties of 700,000, they were a large employer. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 employees between both counties. So they did function. There was a point in time where the state did fund that directly. That changed about 20 years ago. So they were completely fee for service. They did offer some marketplace services, and there were a number, I don't remember the exact amount throughout the state, but they did have some specialties. There were some that were stronger than others, some that provided more services. For example, there was one in the Pittsburgh area that provided an online teacher application service that was used statewide. So that was a market center for them. So in that way, they made funds through selling that product to schools and others. So that was one component. Their major funding component, in addition to state grants, federal grants, was special education services and those specific services for schools. So that schools would pay for specific services for their students. So it was a combination of structures. There was no direct state funding unless there was an initiative they were paying them to implement. It was tuition for special education students, federal grants, and marketplace types of programming.
So if, like you said, there was this online application piece, they could sell that, they were making money, they took, and then there were no regulations, it just went back into their annual budget.
Into their
Yeah,
budget, they
or
pay for
not-
staffing and
Yeah,
personnel.
anything, yeah, just like a bake sale, whatever it was, however you're making the money, it just goes right back. Okay.
So another example I could give you, Vermont, we now have a requirement to develop emergency operations plans.
Yeah,
So our intermediate unit employed one person who was former military police, who was a police officer, had an education background. And he was the police officer for that organization and actually wrote federal grants, did trainings in school safety, and also helped schools develop their emergency operations plan. That was, I think we paid him $4,000. We paid the intermediate unit $4,000 for those services to help us develop our own system-wide plan.
yeah,
So each school district just budgeted into what they needed from BOCES? Was it for a profit, is it a profit, for profit or non-profit?
They were nonprofit
Okay.
education agency, but their so-called profit was to fund their organization and provide those services and pay their employees so they could even that cost out. Which was, in some cases, it was a cost savings to school districts, and in some cases, it was just the ability to utilize a person or expertise that you needed for your students. You were legally obligated to provide, but you could not on your own afford that service for maybe one time a week for a student.
7 weeks.
Oh, thank you. So when did Pennsylvania or Lancaster make this shift or adopt BOCES?
From my memory, it was sometime in the 70s and it coincided with the original version of the Individuals with Disability Education Act to provide specialized services that at that point schools did not have.
Thank you. And then subsequent to that, did they do any analysis of real savings? You know, I understand the convenience and what have you, and coordination, what have you, but did they do any studies on the savings?
I'm sure they did. I'm not aware of them, and that's something I could certainly find out for the committee if you want me to.
It's always helpful in this environment, so it's,
Yes.
thank
That
you.
would be great, yeah, Sarah Newick.
Are your intermediate unit folks, employees, are they unionized?
Yes. They have both professional staff, union, NEA affiliate, as well as support staff. So they were unionized as well.
Thanks for jumping back in.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's a great conversation. We know that Mr. Haas cannot make it, we're told, so we have Mr. Skarzinski. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you. Sorry I can't be there in person. I hear the snow has been tremendous.
Where are you located, Mr. Skarzinski?
So I live in the Hartford area in Connecticut. I currently work in actually two places. I'm an assistant superintendent of schools for the Area Cooperative Education Services, and we are an education service agency in Connecticut. They're called Regional Education Service Centers. And those were established by law in 1972. I spend 3 days a week doing that work, and 2 days a week I spend as interim superintendent of Hampton Elementary School, which is a pre-K through 6 building of 72 students. So I understand the pain points of small scale schools rather well. And I spent my first 2 years as an administrator as an assistant principal for ACES, and then spent 11 years with the Capital Region Education Council, which is the education service agency in the Hartford area, and then returned back to ACES in 2021 after serving a year as superintendent in Wyndham Southeast when family needs pulled me back to Connecticut. So ACES is, some of the questions that you talked about before. ACES is what we would call a fee-for-service, not-for-profit organization. So we're not totally a nonprofit, but we categorize work into what we would identify as benevolent work. And so that's money that you don't really generate any revenue on, or you may take a loss, but it's work that's necessary to be done. And then there's surplus generating work. Much of that work comes through our specialized programming. So ACES as an organization, and when I'll share some numbers with you, keep in mind that RESCs were established over 50 years ago in Connecticut. And so there's an economy of scale that we have that might be difficult to grapple with. But ACES is an organization, is a $120 million organization with about 1,200 employees. Over half of our employees are non-certified individuals that are working in our specialized programs. Through the work, much of the work that we do is through specialized programming. I think some of the questions that were brought up before and some of Jeff's testimony earlier about developing this work organically makes a lot of sense. When I was superintendent in Wyndham Southeast, we helped commission the study with Nate Levinson actually picked up and did the feasibility study for the region to see would the region sustain an education service agency, and the report came back positive that it would. So we have a range of different services that are offered. I'm happy to answer questions about what we offer. It might be easier if you ask questions, because I could talk for quite some time about the work that we do.
I think it'd be interesting to know what you offer, and also just to clarify, you're sort of you're a nonprofit. Is this part of the Connecticut system?
So Connecticut by law was established into 6 regions for regional education service centers. And so we have with ACES, it's 25 or 26 different districts that make it up. CREC is about 26 or 27 different districts. The governing board, so we have an executive director, we have a range of central office staff. We have a governing board that's comprised of Board of Education members or school board members from each of the sending communities. Operates with a board chair, a vice board chair, a treasurer, a secretary, all of those things that go on. We follow generally approved accounting principles and practices. So we're using some of the same, the same UNIS numbers and object codes that a typical district would use. But we operate as an entity that provides services to the school districts.
Senator Kilo, please.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I'm just wondering, so you are an assistant superintendent, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because it sounded like when we were speaking about some of the other BOCES like models, that the folks that were sort of at the top of the hierarchy were more like CFOs or almost like kind of CEOs. I'm just wondering, because the title superintendent to me is usually related to actually, the operational education.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk to that. So our organization is broken up into a school side and a services. So we have 2 main platforms, and then we have a cross-platform division. So the main we have a services side, and that's work that's external work, that's work that's fee-for-service work to districts. That is anything from instructional coaching to providing BCBA, board certified behavior analyst support, psychological testing services. We do work with technology brokerage services. On that side, we help with regionalized special education transportation brokerage. So instead of the school or the parent calling multiple numbers across multiple towns or multiple towns trying to arrange transportation services, we provide that service to help coordinate specialized transportation for our member districts. The services side has gotten into, some interesting things over the years. They are helping districts with solar projects. For a long time, CREC, when I was employed by CREC in the Hartford area, one of the services they offered to districts was an owner's rep for construction and building purposes, so that they would do the work upon the part of the school districts that may not have had that internal capacity to help navigate through some of the complexities of a school construction project. And then we have the school side. So I oversee 3 magnet schools. We have, depending upon the day that you want to count, 7 or 8 specialized programs. Those specialized programs range anywhere from adjudicated youth and alternative educational placements for non-identified students to programs for autism, students that have significant medical, they're medically fragile, students with other emotional and behavioral disturbances. And so it's kind of a range of with everything that we can imagine. We're responsive to the districts and to particular district needs as well. And so when they're kind of low incidence, but high demand type of behaviors, we've been able to leverage some capacity within our programs to create more focused and specialized programs for our school districts.
Please, send away.
So when I hear term BOCES being on western part of the state of Vermont, think of career technical education. Is there any, can you talk to any of that interface within your system?
So in Connecticut, there's a whole technical school system that exists to provide that level of support, and that kind of is under its own guidance and management within Connecticut. I think within Vermont that those programs exist still within the school districts. Where we have done work when the GEAR grants came out, the technical schools didn't have the capacity to coordinate the work and professional development and collaboration for the technical schools. And so where we've serviced those programs has been through those when the GEAR money was available, providing professional development, collaboration, and communication opportunities between those spaces, as well as kind of curriculum development to make sure that they were matching the needs within the requirements within Connecticut.
Thank you. First, thank everyone for testimony. It's a great topic, but for Andrew specifically, you mentioned school construction or at least something to that effect. I'm wondering where in the organization the construction fit. Was it in the BOCE or was it somewhere else in the organization, in the overall education organization?
So when I was with CREC, we had so there was a landmark court decision in Connecticut, this Chef v. O'Neill court case, which established that Connecticut schools were the schools in Hartford were racially segregated by law because of the way Hartford itself is largely Black and Hispanic and largely poor. The surrounding towns are not. There was a court case filed against the state saying we're segregating students from Hartford, ruled in the plaintiff's favor that those laws. So that's the background to that. So one of the answers to that was the creation of a large number of magnet schools and schools of choice for all the students in the area and all the students in the region. With that came money to build permanent schools and facilities to help bring students from Hartford and the surrounding towns together. And so we weren't having that racial and socioeconomic isolation between kids. So some of that school construction work and expertise came out of that level of work. What the organization noticed was that there was a clear and compelling need within our member districts to have people serve as an owner's rep to help navigate them through the challenges of a school construction project, whether that's from the formation of an initial building committee and doing some of that initial founding work or kind of identifying what funding sources were, all the way through kind of getting through the Department of Administrative Services and school funding arms of the state of Connecticut, which is a challenging task.
So, and where does construction sit now? Is it inside the BOCE? In the service?
Yeah, they still sit in there. They still sit within that. I believe CREC still has an arm that does that level of work.
Thank you. Yeah. So again, so for Andrew and possibly Michael, so given your 50 years of experience with BOCES, would you re-engineer the system? From your, just from your perspective, you don't have to, serve as a representative of your organization, but what would you re-engineer? What would you do differently if you were doing it from scratch?
I think one of the areas that where we've gotten really good in the last year, and I would think differently about starting it on sooner, is how do we analyze and assess when, so an education service agency does function as if it's its own business. You know, while we're in service to the districts, there is a bit of a business model to that. One of the topics that comes up is how can we quickly look at what are areas that are kind of perpetual losses for us? And so what are areas that, so it's a BOCE or a RESC or an ESA will take on a certain level of risk with the work that they do, and making that analysis of, is this something that's benevolent work that we know we're going to take a loss on this money and we'll be in the red on it, or is this kind of surplus work that's really critically important to have? I think looking at the processes for how do you gauge those key performance indicators that we would expect to see earlier on to get a sense of, is this going to be something that's sustainable for the future? Or is this something that we need to just look at in general? What types of services do we jettison because they're no longer relevant? And so having better processes around that.
Anything else?
I think one of the topics that did come up is like, what do you do if you have one BOCE in Vermont or multiple ones? You know, Connecticut encountered a number of years ago, and something that you might want to consider is what are those inter-BOCES relationships like? Connecticut's finally has what we'd call a RESC alliance that's working well together. But at the core of that RESC alliance is an agreement that they're not going to compete across borders unless that other entity doesn't offer that service, for instance. So I am currently serving as an interim superintendent in a different RESC in a different area of the state, but that area of the state doesn't have a RESC that offers the level of interim superintendent type of work. We have another agency in the southern part of our state that does executive searches. So because they offer that, that's the task, that's the job that the other groups don't tend to want to pick up. And so there's an agreement that they're not going to cross those boundaries and compete with each other and steal opportunities to work with each other.
Yes, sir. Good.
What's the acronym that you're using? RISC or RESC?
Oh, RESC, I'm sorry, Regional Education Service Center.
There you go, this contender.
Go.
So so in July, so ACES is a member of the Association of Education Service Agencies. ASA is an entity that is an advocacy body. It's an organizational body for the education service agencies or BOCES or collaborative education service groups or whatever we call them. That it's a national organization. They'll be having their Summer Leadership Institute in New Haven this year. If you're curious about the range of different services that they offer, it's a good time of year in July to see the coast of Connecticut, to see the different services and things that are provided. But I'd also encourage you to talk to Joan Wade, who's the executive director of ASA. And Joan is a tremendous advocate for the work of education service agencies, but she can also give you the range of the different organizations throughout the country. And so last year I participated in the executive in residence program with ASA, and we were among the larger groups. Texas, as you can imagine, has a number of huge organizations that service thousands and thousands of employees and tens of thousands of students. There are other ones in other parts of the country that are very small that have a shop of 10 to 15 people. So you can get a real range of what the organizations are like in the work that they do. And Joan could certainly speak, eloquently and robustly on that topic.
Feel true.
So that's awesome.
Anything else from any of our guests? Any other final comments? Mr. Francis, do you want to say anything?
Only
That's
that
sort of
you did better with your witnesses today than you did with your witness yesterday.
You notice that we gave you a little extra time yesterday. We budgeted that in. I've known you long enough.
So just curious when you're going to announce the afternoon competition.
Is there anyone else that any of you believe, either committee members or witnesses that you want to hear from that you think would be helpful on this topic? I'm feeling like we're moving in a good direction. I'm not hearing a lot of opposition yet. Any naysayers out there, folks you want to hear, please?
I was just gonna suggest, I don't know if we've heard from any business managers yet. It might be a good idea
That's a
just to
great
get a insight on
Great
the
idea.
actual,
Financial piece.
yeah.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Anyone have other ideas that would help guide our work? in this? Right. What do you think, Mr.?
No,
No, right now?
now.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Be sure to wear your glasses.
Yeah, oh, yes, does anybody need, we still have extra glasses. Anybody? No?
Senator Weeks ahead.